Welcome to September, guys. It's time. Seasons are rolling. You're hunting soon, if not now. How exciting. This is episode 7 of the Hunt Backcountry podcast, presented by Exo Mountain Gear. In tonight's episode, we talk with Mark Kenyon from Wired to Hunt. If you've heard of Wired to Hunt, it's a site that's dedicated to whitetail. But tonight we're talking, how does a Midwestern whitetail guy become a successful Western elk hunter? And that's Mark's story. We learned some great lessons from Mark in terms of fitness and gear and strategy. Specifically, how did Mark change his mindset to go from whitetails to elk and do it successfully? We hear the story of Mark's first successful elk hunt, and it's a good one. But first, this week's giveaway winner is Brady Cooper. Brady left us a review on iTunes and said that some of the tips from this podcast helped him kill his first deer. That is awesome news. If we can help anybody be more successful, well then, that's a success for this podcast. This is Mark Hilsing. Tonight, Steve Speck's away. It's just me and the other Mark Kenyon, for this interview. So enjoy episode 7. All right, Mark, welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. How are you tonight?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. Excited to be on the show.
So where are you at now?
At this very moment, I am back home in Michigan. Haven't been here for a while, but I am here in the Midwest.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Why have you not been there? You've had a pretty epic summer. What's been going on?
Yeah, my wife and I rented a small home out on the Wyoming-Idaho line and lived out there for 2 months. We both love the mountains, love all the different types of recreation you can do out there, and we've always went out for a week or so, maybe a couple of weeks a year. But this past year, my wife changed jobs, and she's able to work from home or really wherever. And we decided, well, we don't have kids, we could possibly do this. Why not? So we did some looking online, found a home, rented it. It was pretty cheap, and we went out there, did a little bit of work, but played a lot. So yeah. It was a cool summer. That's awesome, man. So was it anything hunting related while you're out there? You're just, backpacking and kind of the general outdoor stuff? It was mostly general stuff. Did a lot of backpacking, a lot of hiking, a lot of fly fishing, all the above. But I did get to do a little bit of scouting. I'm planning, as of now, a high country mule deer hunt in central Idaho. So we went out and checked that spot out one weekend. So that was the one hunting thing I did out there. Yeah. And did you have much luck scouting? No, unfortunately not. It was it was a debacle of a trip. I don't know how much you want to hear about it, but yeah, we went out there with our dogs. They were living with us, so we took them out there and lived out west with us. So we had to take them everywhere we went. So It was myself, my wife, my black lab, and our 5-pound Yorkie Pomeranian mixed dog. Little yiper. Yeah, exactly. So we were going to, head in on this trip, and I found a trail that, was supposedly relatively well maintained that would get me into this basin that I was trying to get into. It was supposed to be about 8.5 miles. So decent ways in there, but not too tough elevation-wise. It seemed like it'd be something that we could get in there with the group of us, and then I could hike in further and scout. Well, long story short, the trail description that I got in the maps were completely inaccurate. I ended up GPS tracking the hike back, and it ended up being almost 12 miles, not the 8.5 that were advertised. Wow. And it was much more difficult than we thought it was going to be, and much more rugged than we expected it to be. So my dog's feet got all tore up, and so it just made a really bad experience. And I had very little time to actually sit in glass and try to scout. And in the little bit of time I had, I didn't see anything. So the lesson learned was that we don't want to access this basin that way. Yeah, for sure. So we've been in the last couple of weeks. Have been in the midst of trying to rejigger our strategy. Yeah. Reformulate the plan. Exactly. It's always an ever-evolving plan, but especially so this past couple weeks. Yeah. Cool. Well, before we dive into the upcoming hunts, which we certainly will, let's back up. You mentioned your wife's job. For all the listeners out there who aren't familiar with you, what do you do and how have you gotten where you are? I know it's been kind of a wild ride for you, knowing you as a friend and talking through it, but what's the brief history? Yeah, so like you said, it's a long, winding road, so I will minimize the story as much as possible. But long story short, I graduated college, got a job in the kind of technology world, and started working, the big boy job. And while doing that, I realized I wasn't getting to do all the stuff I love the most, which is the outdoors, especially hunting. So at that time I actually started a blog the summer before, but I decided now I had a full-time job. They'd shipped me out to San Francisco to work for half a year, that I really wanted to dive into this. So this blog was called Wired to Hunt, wiredtohunt.com. And I started working on that back in the fall of 2009 really heavily. And at that point, I kind of got some inspiration from some different books and people that made me believe that maybe I could actually take this from just a fun little project to work on to get my deer hunting fix and actually turn that into maybe a career someday, years and years down the road. So that was kind of this dream I had. Over the next 4 years, I worked kind of tirelessly. I mean, pretty much every single day I was working on this website. And as I was doing that, I started meeting more people in the industry and eventually got my foot in the door with some magazines. So I started writing for different hunting magazines, continued building Wired to Hunt, and over years and years, finally got to the point where Wired to Hunt was large enough that I could actually make a living from it. So I resigned from my day job in the fall of 2013, and I have been now running Wired to Hunt full time and writing for magazines and a handful of other things on the side. But basically, I write about hunting and I hunt, and I've been really blessed to be able to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I can't believe it's been almost 2 years since you've made that jump already.
It is crazy.
It's gone by fast.
Really fast. That still feels like yesterday that I was just, making that decision. Like, holy smokes, could I actually do this? And now wow, I've been doing it 2 years and haven't lost my house yet. So
yeah.
it's a good situation.
Yeah, that's cool. So how did you transition from, living in Michigan, hunting the Midwest and being a whitetail guy into getting more and more into Western hunting? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, it was something I'd always wanted to do. Like you mentioned, I grew up in the Midwest. I've always been a big whitetail deer hunter my whole life. But, I'd always seen the shows. I'd read the books. I'd always seen these amazing adventurous hunts out west and had been, intrigued by them. And in the, just after college, I really got into backpacking and that kind of stuff. And we started going out west often, my wife and I, to do our hiking and backpacking trips. So every time I did that, I kept thinking, man, it'd be awesome to take this backpacking that I love and combine it with hunting that I love. So I kept on thinking, like, this is something I know I'd like. But for whatever reason, it just was always something that I said, someday I'll do it. Someday I'll do it. I was caught up in work and deer and all that kind of stuff. I had buddies who'd been out west hunting elk and things, and they'd been telling me, man, you got to get out there. You got to try it. And I kept saying, yeah, someday. And then, interestingly, and you might be able to relate to this a little bit because I know you're a fan, but I was reading a book by Steven Rinella, and it was his first book, the Hawk Guide or whatever it is to
the
Scavenger's Guide. Scavenger's Guide to Hawk Cuisine.
Yep.
And there's a chapter in there where he talks about an elk hunt he was on with one of his brothers, I think. And for whatever reason, I haven't read the chapter since that very first time, so I can't even really remember what it was about the story that got me. But I just remember sitting on my couch reading this chapter, and it just somehow hooked me. I was like, I have to do this. It's time. It's time to just go do this. So I closed my book. I grabbed my cell phone. I texted my buddy who had been out there before and who'd continued to, say, we really got to do it someday. Well, I texted him right then, like, we're going to go elk hunting this year. And he responded. He's like, are you serious? You finally want to do it? And and then that just kind of went from there. So we went out, had an amazing first year. And then I went back another year. And now I'm going again this year. So it's something that at this point, I don't see myself ever not doing. I'll do it every single year for the rest of my life. As long as I can, I'll be doing it.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, we're really similar in that regard. In the same way, I grew up in the Midwest, whitetail hunter, and I just came to the point where I was like, enough thinking about it, enough daydreaming about it, enough reading about it. I just got to figure out how to make this thing happen, and commit to doing it. And it was, in the same way that I just had a moment where I fully committed, just like you did. And as you know, it's a lot of work from there, which is a little bit of, what we want to talk about tonight. Feedback from the podcast, we've heard from so many guys who are either out east and want to go west, or guys who are already out west but are still just sort of getting into backcountry hunting, getting into backpack hunting, things like that. What would you say in the last few years mark the process for you, or some of those biggest learning curves and or key lessons learned that have made you successful here in a few short years?
Yeah, so there's been a lot. I mean, tons and tons of lessons. So I'll lay a few out there, I guess, and you can take it wherever you'd like to. But I think one of the big things that's very important, and I had a little bit of a head start on this, but I think a lot of guys that maybe started out as deer hunters in the east and are finally going to go out west, I think something that is very different for a lot of guys that you have to kind of figure out is the whole fact that you need to, at least in the type of hunt I'm doing and the type of hunts you've done, you have to live out of your pack for a week or 10 days or something. And so it's this whole process of trying to understand, what do I need? What do I not need? How do I pack it all? How do I get these right things? How do I pick the essential gear items that I need? And then how can I actually, get that up into the mountains and survive with that for, that period of time.
Yeah.
So for me, since I already had been doing a lot of backpacking before I started backpack hunting, I had the basics.
Right.
And I felt very comfortable with, living out in the woods in that kind of way. But when you add all the hunting gear and you add the fact that you're, chasing elk or mule deer or whatever all around the mountains, it does add a whole new dynamic. Not to mention, if you actually are successful and you pack an animal out, then you've got a whole nother piece. So I think a big lesson I learned was just the importance of, at least for me, my style, is like micromanaging what I take. Like really thinking through every item, really dialing in what's the absolute necessities here and then not bringing anything else. Because I want to be as minimal as possible, because I know I'm going to be huffing it, going up and down all these mountains. I'm going to be really, straining myself physically. And then especially if I have to bring meat back and all that, I need to be prepared to be able to, take everything out that I don't absolutely need and haul back, 80, 90, 100-pound packs. So
yeah.
Big lesson was learning to be as minimal as possible with my pack, and then physically preparing for what I'm not sure you can ever perfectly prepare for unless you're actually out there doing it all the time.
Yeah.
I thought I was in great mountain shape in the past, and I'd done it a bunch, but when you throw a 90-pound pack of meat and hike miles and miles and miles back and forth, that's something that it's hard to replicate.
Yeah.
In the Midwest. So I definitely have learned that I need to do more things to prepare for that.
Yeah. How has your preparation and training changed from what you thought you needed to do to then packing out an elk and going, oh, well, here's what I really need to do to help be more prepared?
I think it's just, and I can't even say I'm doing a perfect job of it, but it's just never getting complacent, never getting comfortable with the fact that I'm in good enough mountain shape. Good enough really doesn't cut it, I don't think. And I think that probably, and this is harped on by so many Western hunters, it's kind of cliche, but it's just so true, is that, your physical fitness is going to determine the enjoyment of your hunt more than almost anything else, I think.
Yeah.
Because if you're out there in the mountains and you aren't physically ready for it, it's not going to be a fun experience going up and down these mountains, chasing these animals when you're huffing and puffing or hurting or, straining your muscles or pulling something or, that can really take the fun out of a hunt really fast. So it's just continuously trying to push. I tried to be better this winter, staying in shape. I've always had kind of a trend of getting in pretty good shape in the summer leading up to the hunt, going on my hunts and stuff. And then once I get into whitetail season, I kind of get
You're sitting in a tree, right?
Sitting in a tree, I'm drinking a Red Bull in the morning, I'm eating donuts at lunch. It gets really fast to lose some of those good habits when you're sitting in a tree for 13 hours straight.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to get better at just keeping that physical fitness regimen throughout the year. And then this year, the one nice thing I had was that I could actually replicate the mountain experience because I lived in the mountains for 2 months. So, we hiked all the time. We hiked a lot, we camped a lot, we backpacked a lot. So I constantly was doing something very, very similar to what I'll be doing this fall. So that helped a lot. I definitely feel more confident going into this hunting season than ever before, just because I've been going up and down those mountains and living in the elevation for most of this summer leading up to this point. So from a just preparation standpoint, those are the two things that I've learned the most, is just you can't get complacent with your fitness, and you really need to micromanage what you're bringing. when it comes to actually hunting lessons, there's plenty there, but I don't know if you want to jump to that yet. Or
yeah, we'll get to that in a bit. I'm curious, is there anything off the top of your head when you're talking about micromanaging the gear? Anything that you can think of that you used to bring or used to think you need that over the last few years you realized you really didn't need? Like, what's some of the fat that you've trimmed?
Yeah, a couple things that jump off right to the top of my head is clothing. At one point early on, I thought I needed to have extra this, extra that. I don't bring any extras anymore, of anything, except for I'll bring one extra pair of socks.
Yeah, we just did a gear episode, and Steve and Lenny and I all laid out the clothing we use, and we got several emails of guys like, what about an extra this? What about an extra that? I think it's just such a comfort and like safety thing, but yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I think a lot of guys struggle with.
Yeah, and maybe I'm just a dirtbag, but I'm just not bothered by being in the same clothes that long. I'm just there to hunt, and I can handle, being a little bit foul like that. Yeah. So I've got a basic base layer shirt, a long sleeve. I wear a Sitka Traverse hoodie that I love, and then I've got a jacket and pant, and I rock that for every day, all day, and that's all I need. And then one extra pair of socks just in case. So I was able to cut a lot of weight just by getting rid of extras there. Maybe one of the biggest things though for me was food. Mm-hmm. My first year, I thought I needed a lot of food. I even went and I think I got some of this from you, an idea you had, like actually counting the number of calories that you should have, how many you need to, be properly fueled throughout the trip. And so I brought all this stuff my first year. And then I realized, and this is something that I should have realized because I'm the same way when I just go on a backpacking trip, but I don't like to eat a lot during the day. Yeah. I get something, I just need a little boost in the morning. And then I'll have some snacks maybe around lunchtime, but nothing real significant. And then I want my big mountain house at night.
Right.
But I brought all this other junk, all these snacks that I never ended up using. So now I just take like a little bar and a power gel in the morning. I have like some jerky and cheese or something like that for lunch. And I might not even always eat that, but just a minimal thing for lunch and then a mountain house at night. And that's all I bring now. And yeah. That's all I need. I know I'm going to, burn a lot of fat. But it's enough to give me the energy I need, but not so much that I'm carrying around a bunch of extra weight.
All right. So I'm interjecting and making an edit to the podcast here. Mark and I dive into this topic of food for backpack hunting. But really, we actually just covered that in the last episode. So check out episode 6 if you want to learn more about food for backpack hunting. And I'll admit, I am, like, just in general, I'm more OCD, like, I like spreadsheets, things like that. But for those of you guys who aren't, I still think it's worth going through this process. Because here's what doing that process you just described, Mark, with like the daily food bag and all that stuff and pre-planning. I mean, I already have my food bags that I'm starting to put together for a trip that's a month out, and I already have my daily bags going.
You are excited.
Yeah, it's crazy. But here's why I think that really matters. It's not about the food. It's about hunting. It's about the more decisions that you can take away from yourself, the more you can focus on hunting. And so if you're worried about food, if you have to go get extra food, if you have to figure out, if you have to ration, if you have to do all kinds of things during the hunt, that's all energy, either mental or physical or time, that you're taking away from being able to hunt. And especially for guys like you and me, I mean, if we're looking forward to a trip for months and months, we're traveling from out of state, nothing drives me more crazy than having to waste time when I'm actually out there and supposed to be hunting. And so really for me, I mean, that's one of those, again, like an efficiency perspective of the more OCD I can be on the front end, the less I have to think about, the fewer decisions I have to make when I'm out there. And then, that's just that much more time and energy I can put into the hunting.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
So
there's only so many variables you can control during a hunt like this. So many things can go wrong. Why wouldn't you want to control the few that you can ahead of time to minimize the chances of challenges later?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, those are some great lessons learned. What about kind of the hunting mindset in particular? Changing from being a whitetail hunter to now coming out west and chasing big game out west. What are the big ahas for you there?
Yeah, there's a lot. But definitely, especially last year, the first year, some things I started to see, okay, this is different. And then year number 2 is when like there were some light bulb moments where it was really clicking. But I think there's some common, challenges that the typical Eastern whitetail hunter has when he goes out west. And it's because there's certain things that are ingrained in us because we're deer hunters out east, that you have to do when you hunt deer. You need to be slow. You need to be quiet. You need to be very careful about all these little things. And probably the biggest thing for me when it came to elk hunting was that you don't need to be like that when you're chasing elk.
Yeah.
So we went from, if we heard a bugle, the other thing is like the distances are very misleading. I think last times I would hear an elk bugle and I'm thinking he must be like right there. And so I'd set up and try to start calling and, it would never happen. But I finally realized, and again, I don't claim to be some kind of expert elk hunter by any means. I'm only heading into my 3rd season. I was able to kill a nice branch antler bull, a 5x5 last year with my bow on public land. So, I've had some success, but by no means, am I an expert. So I'm just passing along the little bit I've been able to learn, and that I've learned from other guys smarter than me. But for whatever it's worth, I've come to find that you got to get in there. You have to be aggressive. You have to not be worried about being super quiet and stealthy all the time. So, I went from that first year where I'd hear an elk bugle and I was like, okay, I need to hunker down right here and wait. I went from that to year number 2, we would hear an elk bugle and we would charge him. Like we'd be running through the woods trying to get close, making lots of noise and not being afraid about it, like being actively trying to make noise, really trying to sell the idea that, hey, I'm another bull running towards you, or I'm a cow that's running away from you, or something like that. And lots of times these elk would let us get right up next to them before they'd ever have any concern that, hey, that's not an elk. So I learned to be aggressive, to push in close, to not be afraid to make noise. That's probably the biggest thing, because that changed our opportunities dramatically. Once we started doing that, we were getting into bow range of a lot of branch antler bulls. We were, having those opportunities. Before that, we thought we could just, stop, call, and that they would just come to us, and that, we had to be really, really careful and sneaky if we were moving through the woods at all. Now I'm moving through the woods. I'm actively, being okay with that noise, moving fast, trying to get into position. It was really more about getting into the right position, not worrying about the noise so much. And then once I was in the right place and once the quarters are really close, then of course you do need to be cognizant of how much noise you're making and making sure you're not seen. But you can get away with so much more than you could with a whitetail deer.
Yeah, for sure.
So that was the biggest thing. The second biggest thing for me was calling. I think we see this on TV all the time when you watch an elk hunting show. It seems like every big bull comes into a cow call or a bugle and charges right in. He runs from 200 yards across all the way right to you and get the shot.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't happening for us out east.
It didn't?
No. Yeah. So we were hunting, like I said, public land in Idaho, over-the-counter units. So, this is land that's getting hunted by other people, lots of other hunters. These elk have been exposed to plenty of hunting pressure. So they just weren't, they're not like the TV elk. So very quickly we learned that our, upset or our very frequent calling was not gonna cut it. So by year 2, we really significantly cut back on our calling. And what we decided to do was, instead of that scenario that I laid out a couple minutes ago where we'd hear an elk bugle, we'd stop right there and try to start calling to him. We don't do that anymore. We would, if we heard an elk, the first thing we try to do is move into position, get as close as we possibly could, and get in between where he is now and where he wants to go. So that's a big learning, big moment for us was when we started to understand where elk wanted to go.
Mm-hmm. And what are you looking for? I mean, like terrain features, or how are you trying to determine that?
Yeah, so it's a mixture of, identifying generic terrain features that elk typically would want to go to. And it's, it's basically trying to understand where the elk bedded and where are they heading to feed. And through experience, we've been hunting the same place now 2 years in a row and heading into my 3rd. And by that 2nd year, we'd started to really understand those locations. So we found the dark timber where, these elk were coming up to bed. So in the mornings, we'd hear the elk bugling down beneath us, and we knew that they wanted to get up on this ridge and take that ridge up to this patch of dark timber where these aspens were. We knew that's where these bulls wanted to head. And so what we would do then is when we would locate where that elk was right now, we would say, okay, what's the fastest way we can get in between him on the route that he wants to be with the wind in our favor? And we would just book it. So we'd be running through the woods trying to get to the spot we need to be, and we would never call at all. Even though he's bugling like crazy and he's moving, obviously, we wouldn't call at all until we were in perfect position, until he was very close. And we would only call if we needed him to come just a little bit closer, or just that little extra oomph. Then maybe we try to call. But I just found in this, I'm sure there's plenty of guys out there who can call and get these elk to come in easily in all sorts of situations. But for us, we're not lifelong elk hunters. We've only been out there a few years. We don't have those chops yet, I guess. And also, like I mentioned earlier, these elk are very pressured. So what we found to work best was get in between where they want to go and only use calling when you absolutely had to. Because when you start calling, you're introducing a new variable that could potentially, spook that elk, or, make him aware that there's something else around here. Or, if he's already going from A to B, why would I want to screw up that if I know that? I'd rather get in between A and B and let it play out as it will, and take advantage of that if I can. So that was really the two big changes we made. And it really produced night and day results from year 1 to year 2.
Yeah. Yeah, those are good points. I mean, again, pretty much our experiences have been identical in learning, and then the lessons that we've learned. I mean, that's totally been the case for us as well. A few other things on that. I mean, just that I've noticed that I've picked up in relation to calling and position and things like that is, we always try to, if we think a bull is in a certain area, and maybe it's midday, maybe he's in dark timber, so we don't anticipate he's going to move anytime soon, but he's active enough that we want to pursue him. Obviously, we want to get as close as we can before we call. And one of the things we pay attention to is that we get on the same elevation that elk is. So we're not, say it's, afternoon, the thermals are rising. Theoretically, you could come at him from the top. And maybe that would work fine, but it's really beneficial, I think, to get on that same elevation and sort of make a cross mountain approach to him. And then obviously in most situations there, the wind's still in your favor. And then at the same time, just playing off smaller terrain features, something like a saddle and a ridge can be really beneficial, because it's kind of going to be a travel route anyway. The elk probably feel more comfortable funneling through there because it's a route that they're probably traveling anyway to get from side to side. So little things like that, I think, can make a difference as you're, trying to work a strategy.
Yeah, I think that's something that, a lot of whitetail hunters could take from their experience and apply to elk hunting to a degree, in that if you're hunting whitetails in hill country where there is terrain and ridges and saddles and different terrain funnels like that, not in all cases, but in many cases, elk will relate to terrain features in a somewhat similar way to whitetails, in that, if there's a saddle and a ridge, there's a good chance that you're going to have elk moving through that, or different things along those lines, that if you pay attention to those terrain features and how they funnel movement, you can start to anticipate it, just like you said, and be ready and set up there. So that's exactly what we were trying to do, is figuring out the route that these elk want to naturally take, and, maybe coax them along a little bit. But I would much rather be where he wants to go and try to get him to come a little more, versus try to pull him somewhere he has no interest in going at all.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So now that we've heard some of the lessons learned, give us a brief story of how did it all come together for you last year on that bull?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It's still it's absolutely one of my favorite hunting experiences of my entire life. Just the entire experience, not necessarily the fact that I shot a bull, but just the entire experience was really special. But to make it short, it was day 4, I think, day 3 or 4 of our hunt. And we'd been having a lot of close encounters because, like I mentioned, we'd kind of made some changes in year 2, and it was translating into much better encounters. We were getting close to bulls. We had numerous very close calls where there was just a branch in the way or different things like that. So that, third or fourth morning, we got up at the crack of dawn and dark, and they were just screaming their heads off all around. And we knew based on the last 2 days that there was a number of bulls that were moving up this drainage, that if we could get in between them, we'd be in a good position. And so we kind of hauled our way that way first thing in the morning and got on a bull who sounded like he was coming right into us. And we got set up, and for maybe, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes, it was just, he would scream at us and we'd be waiting, and then we'd give him a little cow call here and there. It seemed like he was just around this little corner. There was a little knoll, and we were set up right on this corner of the knoll, and he sounded like he was just at the bottom in this little valley, like 50 yards away, even 50, 100 yards away, and we just needed him to come around the corner. And he was hung up, and he actually ended up being a little farther away than we thought, but he was hung up. We kept waiting and waiting and waiting, and it wasn't happening. So finally we kept sneaking in closer and closer, and finally realized he was on the other side of this valley, up on the other side a little bit in this really thick stuff, and we decided to give up on that bull. So now it's 8:15, maybe 8:30, somewhere around there, relatively late in the morning. It'd been daylight for an hour and a half now, and things were still relatively loud. There was a lot of elk talking, but not quite like what it was, first thing in the morning. So we're like, well, we got to figure out where we're going to go from here, what's going to happen next. And we started moving up because there were a few elk that had gotten ahead of us, and that seemed to be the only action happening. So we decided to try to come up from beneath them, but try to swing around to keep our wind from, those thermals from rising up towards them. So we tried to cut the corner essentially. And in the midst of that, I guess, a roundabout way of continuing the story, cutting the story down, we came over this hill, and right as we came to the top of a hill, we both froze, and we just saw antlers. And at the top of the hill, all you could see was just above his eyes, forehead, and then this rack staring right at us. He'd heard us, or he could see the tops of our heads or something. It was this 5x5 bull, and we kind of walked up on him. He'd been quiet. There'd been some other bulls bugling around, and this one we kind of just walked up on. After all these other close calls where we've been calling and engaging, and interestingly, the one that I ended up getting a shot at, we kind of just walked up on. But he was there probably 75 yards away, kind of had this brief stare down, and then he kind of bounced away. So as he bounced away, I started kind of jogging up the hill to try to get a better view and see what was going on. And at this point, then he stopped again, turned, looked over his shoulder. I'm up there. I start pulling an arrow out of my quiver, knocking the arrow really, really, really slowly as he's staring. And he just keeps staring at us, but can't really figure out doesn't really know what's going on. So he turned and slowly started walking away. And that kind of like deer and elk both do it. They kind of do this kind of head bob, walk away, like, I don't really like the situation. I need to move on. So he starts doing that. He's way out of range at this point, but I'm still getting knocked and, seeing what I can do. So as he turns to walk away, he turns his head away from me. So every time he turned his head away from me, I started taking a long step, getting closer and closer. And this ended up being probably like a 15-minute to 20-minute process where he walked away, way out of range, got into this timber and disappeared. At that point, we tried a couple cow calls, just, I don't know, just kind of a Hail Mary. And I kept scooting up closer and closer. And then next thing I know, he pops back out of this timber. Curious. He must have never really figured out what we were because he was just curious. So he popped out and started kind of side hilling past us. Now, again, he's probably 100 yards away, 80 yards away, something like that. And he starts walking kind of parallel to me. And every time he stepped behind a bush, I would scoot up closer. Every time he stepped behind a little pine tree, I'd run up until the distance kept closing and closing and closing. Finally, I was like, holy smokes, this might actually happen. So I got my rangefinder out and started trying to, range him every time he put his head behind something. And the rangefinder kept getting there was all this grass in the way. And so I couldn't get a good range on him. So it was telling me he was 20 yards away, but I knew he's like 60 or 70 or something like that. So finally, there was one big pine tree in between us. And I knew that after he got behind that, it'd be wide open. There wasn't going to be any more scrub pines. There was no more, brush. It was going to be us in the wide open standing next to each other, and he was going to figure us out. So it's kind of now or never. So in my head, I'm like, okay, as soon as he gets behind this big pine tree, I'm going to sprint towards him. I'm going to get as very close as I can and hopefully be within range when he pops out on the other side of this big pine tree. So he gets behind the pine tree. I gun it. I run as fast as I can. And, at this point, this was the lesson I learned about not worrying about trying to be quiet.
Yeah.
If I was a deer hunter or if I was hunting whitetails, this would have never ever worked. You do, yeah. Never would have worked. Yeah. But with this elk, he just didn't know what was going on. He just couldn't quite figure out the situation. Maybe he thought that there was cows over there, but I sprinted. I probably covered, I probably closed 30, 40 yards until I thought, okay, he's about to come out. That's about as far as I can get. And he stepped out past the pine tree. And at this point, he looked in range. I did a quick gut check. I was like, all right, it looks 40 yards to me. There was no way I could range at this point. My buddy who was with me did one cow call just to make that elk look away from me.
Yeah.
And I drew back right when he turned and put the 40-yard pin in him and let her rip. And it was a good shot. So, but the interesting thing is, and I get rambling like this, and that's a long-winded story, I guess. But, that was only such a small part of my experience. Yeah. Was actually the actual shot, the encounter in the shot. Almost just as important or almost as impactful for me was everything that happened after the shot. Finding that elk and actually walking up on an animal like that was unbelievable, and just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful animal. So different than a whitetail. I mean, it's a huge animal. Yeah. And then just gutting it and skinning it and breaking them apart. And then by far the thing that will probably stick with me the longest was that pack back. At this point, I don't know, we were 5-6 miles, somewhere around there away from our vehicle. From our minivan, our elk hunting minivan,
which is a sweet rig. If you guys haven't seen Mark's setup, it's pretty awesome.
It's unique.
Yeah.
You got to give that at least.
Yeah,
so we then I shot that bull I think around 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and the process of we had to I found him, and then we had to go back to our camp, which is a couple miles away at this point. And we had to drop off a bunch of stuff, get some things we need, get my good camera, get pictures and stuff. Came back to the bull, skinned him, quartered him, got the first load packed up. And with two of us, we had to do it in 2 loads. And so from that point on, from the shot around 9, we didn't get everything back to the vehicle, both loads. It was kind of 2.5 trips until about 9 p.m. So it was almost 12 hours straight of working that, getting that bull into our packs and huffing it up and down, up and down, up and down. And that was the thing, where we're hunting, it's not necessarily the most, visually impressive mountains. They're not huge Rocky Mountain peaks, but it's just endless ups and downs, tons and tons and tons of creek bottoms and hills and ridges and bottoms and hills and ridges. So I don't know how many feet of elevation that we gained over the course of that hike, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But it was enough to make me not want to hike anymore that day. That's for sure. So that was a memory, was that day, that experience, packing it out and being, just whooped. And then we got back to the, after our first load, we got to the van, and we were just whooped, and we broke open the cooler. We're like, oh, we have to have something in here to eat or drink. We had a bag of Doritos and 2 still cold Mountain Dews, and that was like the best meal of my life.
Phenomenal, yeah.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. So we killed the entire bag of Doritos, drank both our Mountain Dews, then hiked all the way back in, grabbed the second load, hiked all the way back out. So like I mentioned, we got back 9 p.m. It's getting dark. It was dark, and we were able to get into a town. We drove like an hour and a half to a town. And there was this this kind of cool cowboy bar where I had like the best hamburger of my life and a cold drink. And it was just an unbelievable night. We ended up checking into a hotel at like 2 a.m. After, hiking all day. And it was just a day that I'll never forget.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. It's always so fun to hear those stories, and, even cooler when it's your first, for sure.
Yeah, it's the full experience for me was what was so special, was doing it ourselves, doing it the hard way, and learning from our mistakes and somehow stumbling into success like that was pretty neat.
Yeah, for sure. That's such a good point, of learning from your mistakes, and then all that. I mean, so much, even in this podcast, we talk about, tips and tactics and everything else. And I just want to encourage guys, especially as, we're at crunch time. So many guys are getting ready to head out on their hunts, to just go and enjoy your experience and learn from it. And just, try to cherish every moment, as cheesy as that sounds. And of course you're going to have low moments. But man, there's just something about learning on your own. Even if you go and you make a trip and you don't fill a tag, if you're learning the lessons, if you're learning more about a species or an area, it's such a successful trip. And when it all comes together, it just makes it that much sweeter. So that's cool.
Yeah. And I would say one thing, especially for the first time, Western hunter, it's hard not to, but really try to go into it with expectations of the fact that, you may not kill anything. There's a very good chance. I mean, the odds of actually killing an animal on these Western hunts, especially for someone new, especially for someone who's not grown up with this type of hunting, they're pretty low. And I think the key is to go into it with the right attitude and to go into it with this, exactly like you said, try to enjoy the experience, enjoy the lessons, enjoy the ups and downs. Take that all as what your trip's going to be and view that as a success on its own. And then if you do get an arrow or a bullet or whatever into an animal, that's incredible. And that's a huge bonus. But I think that you're going to be a much happier hunter and you're going to enjoy your trip a lot more if you go into it with the idea that, hey, this is going to be a successful hunt no matter what. Just getting out there and trying this is going to be a great hunt.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a mindset issue. I obviously, through my site and all the content that I've put together, talked to so many guys who were, going out either for the first time or one of the first few times. And that's something I always tell guys who are like on the fence about going, is like, man, totally, I recommend do it. Just like we talked about in the beginning, just decide to do it. At the same time, understand that, you might be paying $600 for a tag that you're not going to punch, but that $600 is worth it for the experience.
Yeah.
And then
absolutely.
I think there needs to be, you set those expectations up front about, what are the odds really? At the same time, as soon as it's go time, when you're driving out there, don't have any other thought in your mind other than I'm coming home with a bull or I'm coming home, with meat in the freezer. So it's like, yeah, set those expectations up front, but when it's time to hunt, man, be confident and be all there. Yeah.
Definitely.
So just go for it. It's cool. When I was on my first elk hunt, so many things went wrong, of course, right? But
I remember those stories.
Yeah. At the very end of the trip, we kind of moved to a new area that weather had pushed us out towards. And anyway, we passed some guys, pretty much the only guys we saw the whole trip. And they were hiking in with empty packs and just kind of looked pretty raggedy, and wasn't even sure if they were hunting. They didn't have like camo stuff on, and so I got to talk to him, like, where are you headed? And the guy was saying, oh, we spent, all day yesterday, 16 hours or whatever it was, packing out a bull. We're going back in because we left camp. And they were like 6 miles in, and we got talking with the guy, and he had lived in the area and hunted the area straight for, he's either 6 or 7 years. I think this was his 7th year, and it was the first elk he shot.
Wow.
But he was, he wasn't bummed. He was obviously as thrilled as could be. And, I'm sure that he didn't regret all those years of work that he put into it. It just made it that much greater. So it's just a good attitude to have. And, there's so much on, like we talked about earlier, on TV, on the internet, and all kinds of expectations that, you have to kill something, you're going to kill something, and it's going to be huge. And just, don't listen to that. Go enjoy the experience and hunt hard, and you'll be glad you did.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing I would recommend, I think, a little bit based on things I've learned and from a lot of guys that I've talked to that have done similar things, that just like with deer hunting, one thing I talk a lot about when it comes to whitetail hunting is that you really need to look at it as it's a ladder. You're taking take things one step at a time, because like you mentioned, in the media today, on TV, we see these things that develop expectations in ourselves that are not realistic. This idea that you have to shoot a giant, or that's easy to shoot a giant, or that, you should be ashamed if you shoot a small deer or small elk or whatever. And that's just not true. You have to walk before you can run. And for some guys, they're never going to want to run, and that's okay. But when it comes to elk hunting, I think before you can learn to shoot a big bull, you need to learn how to hunt an elk at all. So you shouldn't feel bad to go out your first year or first 2 years and shoot a cow or shoot a spike. I don't think that's something anyone should feel ashamed of at all. I think, you have to learn to take those first steps. And I was seriously considering shooting a cow, and luckily I was able to, it was neat. I was able to get an opportunity to branch antler bull before I did that. But I would have been incredibly happy to shoot a cow and, bring some incredible elk meat home too. That's great too. So I would just, at least in my opinion, is I would encourage people to be okay with that, to start learning at some point and have some of these experiences and not feel like they need to hold out for a 300-inch bull.
Yeah. No, that's a good word. I agree 100%. So, you're getting ready to embark upon a few Western hunts here in the coming weeks and months. What are some of the last minute things that you're doing, putting together, whether that's gear or just mindset and final details? What are some of the things that you're preparing for in this last couple weeks?
Yeah, it's nothing revolutionary, but the basics, leading these final weeks, continuing to study maps, just looking, I look at Google Earth a lot, constantly, trying to think through how might the elk be using this area or using this area, or where might the mule deer be bedded, or, how might we be able to access this spot a little better, looking at those things a lot. Of course, then I'm also continuing trying to do a little bit of physical preparation. I'm admittedly have been a little bit lazy the last week and a half here since I've been back in the Midwest, so I have to get back on things with that. But continuing that in these final weeks, shooting my bow, continuing to shoot my bow more and more, and making sure I'm ready, going out there soon. And then, of course, I'm not as good as you. I don't have my food bags packed or anything yet, but I'm certainly in the process of just starting to think through, okay, is there anything else I need to order from Amazon? Is there anything else I need to make sure I have? So that in that final week, I can lay everything out. I can pack everything carefully. I can check all my bags. I can, go through the checklist and make sure I've got all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted. That's what my last week will look like, is just going through the gear obsessively, making sure everything's in order, everything's packed where it needs to be. But yeah, I mean, it's basic things, but you don't want to procrastinate on all those things and wait till the last minute. Make sure you're planning ahead of time. Make sure those couple weeks beforehand, you're thinking about gear, you're thinking about your plans, you're finalizing things with your hunting buddies, making sure, like you said, that there's no other challenges or decisions or issues that could come up in the way of your hunt before it even starts.
Yeah.
So that's what my final weeks look like. Relatively basic, but important things to just continue to pay attention to.
Yeah. So one final thing I want to talk about just a little bit with you and see what your experience has been. And that's a hunting partner. For a lot of guys who, again, especially if you're making a big trip, going out west from the Midwest or from out east, the partner is critical. But, I think a lot of guys are already out west and already hunting elk or already hunting mule deer, and they're still looking for somebody, that they can partner with. Can you just kind of speak to your experience of a hunting partner? Kind of what are some of those traits that make a hunting partner valuable, and how did you even find your hunting partner for a big trip like that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the absolute most important decisions of your entire hunting trip will be who you're going to go with. I mean, there's nothing that can ruin a trip faster than having a partner who isn't a good fit for your goals or for your personality or for what you're trying to do. So I've been very fortunate. I've had good partners. I've had good people that have gone hunting with me so far. I was fortunate to just have some good friends that I was already friends with who were interested in doing this kind of stuff. And so it just was natural that, hey, we should go and do this together. I knew that our personalities already clicked. I knew that our goals were in line. So, I didn't have too much of a search to try to find the right fit, but I can understand, that sometimes you might not have a buddy that's that right fit, and it is a little more difficult to find the right hunting partner. And I really do think there are some key characteristics that can lend someone to being the right hunting buddy for a trip like this, because as you mentioned, there's so many things, as we talked, there's so many different variables that can go into a hunt, that can screw things up, that can change your plans, that can, just take a hunt and make it take a 180-degree turn, and you don't know what's going to happen. If you've got a buddy who struggles with change, who struggles with adversity, who struggles with, attitude, positive thinking in the face of adversity, that can be a tough person to be on a hunting trip with, because if you're out there to try to enjoy your trip and to try to keep hunting and to push through those things, there are some people who just don't handle that well, who are really negative or who will give up right away. There's all sorts of weird personality quirks people can have that could really rub on you the wrong way if you're stuck with just them for 7 days or 10 days in the middle of the mountains. So I think, first thing is you really need to know this person before you go out and hunt. I would say, at least from my experience, I wouldn't want to go with someone I didn't know, because so many risks in that. I also would be, looking for someone who's laid back and who can go with the flow. if there's one thing I know for certain about a Western hunt, it's that things are going to be uncertain, that things are going to change, that my plans will likely have to change, and you just constantly need to be able to adjust. And so I would need a hunting buddy who can adjust and who can go with the flow and who can make the most of a situation. Positive, I think it's important for positive thing, as we've talked about, it's important for you as an individual, and it's also important that your partner's positive too, because having a negative Nancy for a full week could be a real downer too. Yeah. So those are a couple of personality things, and then I think goals. Also being on the same page about what your goals are with your trip, because if the two of you have totally different things in mind, that's obviously going to make for a lot of conflict. If one of you just wants to go out there and enjoy an experience in the mountains and hunt a little bit, but relax at camp some and do this and that, that's fine. But if the other one of you is dead set on shooting a 280-inch bull and nothing else will make you happy and that's all you want to do, well, the two of you are going to have very different, a very different trip in mind.
Yeah.
And if the two of you are together, that could cause some challenges too.
Yeah.
So I think that all being the case, if those are the personality traits I'm interested in, and if those the goals are important, I think it's the communication beforehand that is so, so important. So making sure that you know the person, and then number two, making sure that both of you have talked about what you're trying to get out of the trip, what you're thinking about, and communicating through all these things so you don't go into it with very different expectations, because that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Mark, that was great advice, not only about partners, but this whole thing. So before we take off and sign off of this call, where can we find your work? Where can we follow your hunts this fall?
Yeah, so wiredtohunt.com. That's wired like, WIRED, then the word to TO hunt.com. That's my main website. And as I've kind of alluded to, that's Whitetail Deer Hunting. It's a website for serious deer hunters, news, stories, and strategies every day of the week. And then I also run the Wired to Hunt podcast, which every week we're talking serious deer hunting tips and tactics. And we have lots of different guests all talking about whitetail deer. So you can find that on iTunes or Stitcher or other different podcast platforms. So wiredhunt.com and the Wired Hunt podcast would be the two places to follow what I'm doing and to learn a few things about deer hunting if that's your thing.
Cool. And I guess you're on social media. Where can we see the picture of your next bull or mule deer when you get it out west?
Yeah, hopefully there'll be good pictures to see. I would definitely check out Wired Hunt on Facebook, at Wired Hunt on Twitter, or same thing on Instagram. All three, you can search for Wired Hunt and you'll see it there. So hopefully I'll have good things to share on social media, hopefully some good stories and some different magazines and whatnot. And if all things go well, I'll have some great stories.
For sure. Well, thanks, Mark.
Hey, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, that's a wrap, guys. Good luck hunting in these next few weeks. Be sure to send us some feedback to podcast@exomountaingear. Leave us a review in iTunes, and definitely let us know how your season's shaping up.
Thank you for listening to the Hunt Backcountry podcast.